Hey Jamie, it's Jason. It's 10:30 at night and I've got a very busy day tomorrow, and I just finished recording a 35-minute vlog letter to you, and then I realized that this brand new mic that is right here and you can't see, that is supposed to make everything sound nice and pretty, has an on button, and that it needs to be switched to that setting. But anyways, let's try it again. I'm pissed off. The other day my friend linked to this website called the Top 10 books.net. It sounds like a really cool idea. Basically, this guy went around, he asked 125 different authors, what are your top 10 favorite books of all time? And then he took everybody's top 10 and he looked through them. So take a look here. And it's got the all-time 10 list, the top 10 books of all time, the top 10 books of the 20th century, the top 10 works of the 19th century, the top 10 books of the 18th century, and the 16th and 17th century, because not a lot of people wrote books in that 200-year span, and the top 10 books until the 15th century, because even if you're a writer and you read a lot of books, you don't read that many books that were written before the onset of the Black Plague in Europe, I guess. And the top 10 books by living authors and American authors and British authors and Russian authors and French authors, basically any kind of author that is white, or maybe African American, probably not Asian American or Indian American. And that's where I start to get angry. Not angry, annoyed. Because look here on the author lists. Top guy, Lee K. Abbott. White guy. Top girl, Diana Abu-Jaber. But her last name's Abu-Jaber, so maybe her ancestry is not European at all. Anyways, I was looking through this list, and I only found a very small handful of people, with Abu-Jaber being a potential new one, who were not from recognizably European ancestry. Edwidge Danticat, Chitra Divakaruni, David Anthony Durham. I checked his biography. His parents were from the Caribbean. Hajin is from China. He grew up in China, was raised there, and now he writes. Now he lives in America, and he writes in English for political reasons. All of these authors are from America or England, maybe Canada. I didn't check in that deeply. All of them write in English. I have a big problem with that, because this website, the idea is like the top 10 books of all time. Number 1, Anna Karenina. Number 2, Madame Bovary. Number 3, War and Peace. Now this, so far, Russian writers, strong literary history in Russia. French writers, very strong literary history in France. Number 4, The Great Gatsby. Here's where I start to see logical fallacies. The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is a great book, as evinced by the title. You probably were assigned to read it in high school, or you read bits of it in high school. There's a reason for that. Part of the reason is because the book's great. The other part of the reason is that whenever the book was first published, nobody liked it. And it wasn't very popular. But then World War II happened. And in World War II, you need a lot of guys to go to a place to shoot people. And they'll be willing to do that, but not for free. And so they got these packages. And inside the packages were those itty-bitty Tabasco bottles. They had cigarettes, probably playing cards, and a couple of books. And one of the books was sort of randomly at the time chosen. It was The Great Gatsby. And so, even though The Gatsby wasn't a terribly popular book, suddenly millions of copies were in print. Fast forward 10 years into the 1950s, and suddenly those millions of American GIs have grown up, have made babies who are now in elementary school. Some of them have become teachers, some of them work on school boards, some of them are in charge of choosing books for high school curricula. And so they chose The Great Gatsby to be included in the American curriculum for high school kids, and since the 1950s, millions of copies of Gatsby have been printed every year, and people like you and me and Jess, and not Yife, because she's not from America, have been reading these in public school. That doesn't mean The Great Gatsby is not a great book, but it does mean that if you ask a lot of people who grew up in America, what are your top 10 favorite books, Gatsby's probably going to be on the list. Now that's not a problem insofar as the value of literature goes, but it is a problem if you want to make a less subjective top 10 list of great books. It's some kind of statistical bias. For example, if you ask 150 chefs what their favorite foods are, and most of those 100 chefs came from America, then you're going to get a lot of chicken wings and hamburgers on that list. Except if you mix the list. For example, if you ask 150 chefs, if you ask 150 American chefs, what's your favorite food? For example, if you ask 150 Americans, what's your favorite food? A lot of them are going to say hamburgers, because in America, we get around to eating a lot of hamburgers one way or the other. If you only ask half of the people from America and then make the other half of the people from India or Malaysia, probably not so many hamburgers are going to be on that list. They might even like hamburgers, but they don't eat as many of them as we do. So it's a statistical bias, and I don't like that about this list, because I am interested in the books that writers read, except I'm not interested in the books that just American writers read, because I'm an American, and I read a lot of the books that they read. I want to know what Finnish writers are reading, or German writers are reading, or Chinese writers are reading, or Sri Lankan writers are reading. And so I looked around, and I found this on Wikipedia, the 100 best books of all time. Let's take a look at the list of authors surveyed. 100 authors were surveyed, correct? Author number 1, he's from Afghanistan. Number 2, from Algeria. Number 3, from Argentina. Number 4, from Austria. Number 5, from Belgium. There's one author from China. I happen to know that the population of China is 1.3 billion, which is a bit over 1/7 of the entire population of the planet Earth. One person on a list of 100 is slightly underrepresented, especially when 19% are represented just by the UK and the United States. France is represented by 3 people. France has a very strong literary history. Except for English, it is the most represented language of the Nobel Prize of Literature recipient languages. But Germany has more people represented on the list than France. Indonesia, Iran, Iraq, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Kyrgyzstan. We missed a very important letter. It's the 10th letter of the alphabet. My name begins with it, as does yours. Japan has a very rich literary history. They've been producing literature since the year 500, or maybe 700, or 800. We don't learn about it in America, except Japan is thought to have the world's first novel, In the Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. Murasaki Shikibu. It's very big. I haven't read it. Neither of you, probably. Jess, have you read it? Was it good? The thing about Japan is they use 4 alphabets. They use the alphabet, they use kanji, they use hiragana, and they use katakana. They love writing so much, they can't keep it contained to just one writing system. And yet, whoever designed this Norwegian book club that designed the 100 best books of all time list didn't bother to ask anybody from Japan. If you don't bother to ask anybody from Liechtenstein, that's because Liechtenstein doesn't have a very rich literary history. Japan does. One of the oldest works of literature in Japanese is called Kaguya-hime. The story of Kaguya-hime is about growing up and the pain of loss of having to leave your parents whenever you mature into an adult. Recently, Studio Ghibli produced an anime about it, and Yife and I were crying very loudly in the theater because it was really sad. Even though the climax was when Kaguya-hime was like, oh Jesus, I'm from the moon and I have to go back soon and that makes me sad. And then a Super Saiyan Buddha comes on a cloud down to the castle where she lives, and he's like, time to go, and the parents are like, oh, don't go, and then Buddha makes him fall asleep, and it's not an action scene. He just comes and gets her and takes her home, and it was so sad. One of the oldest works of literature in English is called Beowulf. Beowulf is a lot like whenever you grab a transformer and a dinosaur toy whenever you were 7 years old and go like this, gra 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 gra, fwah. Because that was the literary complexity of the English language 1,000 years ago. So when I see that of the 125 people surveyed for top10books.net were mostly born in America and England and speak English as their mother tongue, I think that the lists themselves and the editor probably suffer from a lack of imagination. Because even though English is infinite and you can produce an infinite number of stories from the English language, it's an infinity with a set of rules, and those rules are the grammar and aesthetics of natural English. You can produce an infinite number of stories in English, and you can produce an infinite number of stories in Chinese, but the patterns of the stories in English and the patterns of the stories in Chinese are going to be different patterns. And I think that's really important, especially these days. America's becoming more multicultural all the time, and even though we live in an economic global age, I think we still have a lot of work to do before we live in a culturally global age. I mean, reading is reading, and reading is usually fun, except reading is also a good opportunity to expand your imagination, and the more infinities of language that you're dealing with, or the more diverse cultural background that you're diving into with the books that you read. Does that make sense? Has, I think, some really real benefits to the way that our imagination and our mind grows over time. My challenge for you too, and me also, is to read more books by writers who don't live in America or England or countries that speak English. Read books that were translated into English from Chinese or from Japanese or from Thai or from some language from Asia or Africa or even Eastern Europe, because we usually don't, and I'm sad about that. And I think it can make us better people. So let me know what you think. Maybe we can make some ground rules for this. Yeah, I'm gonna take a voice break now. Talk to you guys later. Can't wait to see your next video. Much love.